This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Your hosts are Seth Jacobson and Patrick Heiler.
Chapter 21.
I think we're here to talk about the Wheel of Time.
Right.
I like that this was called Listening to the Wind because they get to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. And the wind, I think, is a big sort of red herring for change.
Yeah, totally.
Red herring is not the right term there.
Whatever. Chapter 21 opens. Nynaeve wakes up at sunrise. She's also passed out, much like Perrin, up against a tree. And she just kind of wakes up and scolds herself like, you can't even stay up one night.
Yeah, which is ridiculous considering how much she's gone through over the last week.
She's hard on herself.
Yeah. I actually wrote, she holds herself to really high standards. And in a lot of ways, I think that's why it's very easy to be hard on her, is because she's so hard on herself.
That's probably true. That's an interesting observation.
You know, she judges herself and we judge her right along with her. Whereas when you have a character who's very self-congratulating, it's very easy to just be like, yeah,
you did do a good
job. Whereas, you know, she does a great job and says, oh, you should have done better.
There's a cool moment here that I actually didn't write this down, but I'm thinking about it now, where because we're looking through Nynaeve's, like this is Nynaeve's point of view. She says, for a moment she stared, wondering where she was. Blah, blah, blah. And she said, in the deepest dimness, some of last year's Shadow's Hand mushrooms made rings on a fallen log. And she just makes that note, and I was like, what a Nynaeve note to make. Because she's like looking around and noticing the herbs or edibles or whatever this is, Shadow's Hand mushrooms.
I do like that Moiraine is just sitting and making tea while she waits for the wheel to weave.
Yeah.
She's very calm. You know, I think one of the things Moiraine does when she's worried is make tea. It's very calming for her. Because right now there's nothing I guess she can follow the boys. But she's sort of exhausted and tired and sitting there.
That's interesting. She sits and thinks.
Yeah.
Nynaeve wanders out of the little copse of trees she took shelter in and starts tracking. And she sees all sorts of tracks, but they're all sort of muddled together and over each other. And she can't really figure out what had happened. She sees hooves, but she's like, it could be a Trolloc, it could be any number of things. And
this is all on the Shadar Logoth side of the river.
Right.
She has not crossed.
And then she smells wood smoke coming from a similar sort of dense vegetation area, and she sort of smirks and walks up because she's not sure if it's Trollocs or if it's the people that she's looking for.
Sure.
You know, before I get there, she's thinking about the night before, and I have this underlined. 10 or so of them, she's talking about Trollocs, seemed to spring out of the ground not 30 spans in front of her, bounding toward her on the instant, howling and shouting, brandishing hooked catch poles. Yet as she pulled her horse around, they fell silent, lifting muzzles to sniff at the air. She watched, too astonished to run, as they turned their backs and vanished into the night. And that had been the most frightening of all. They know the smell of who they want, she told her horse, standing in the hollow. And it is not me. So that's what Nynaeve is assuming is going on.
Yeah, the Trollocs seem pretty driven. They want the boys in particular, and they don't have time for distractions. Although I'm sure they love to butcher and murder and eat a lone woman on a horse. They are pulled by the presence of the Fade to go after their target.
Yeah.
And I was wondering I think we were wondering if maybe this isn't why she's safe when she's following them during that week.
Yeah, we were talking about that because she was behind the party while she was chasing them toward Berlan.
Right.
As they were all headed toward Berlan, but that would have meant she was like either in the midst of the Trollocs or like right behind the Shadow Spawn.
Sure.
So it was a little surprising that she was ignored.
That's my assumption, is they're just so driven that they're really driven not to bother anybody else.
It really could be. I mean, my first instinct was to be like, did she get scared and channel? I don't think that's what happened, but my first instinct was to go, what happened here? Like, why did they make eye contact and then turn around?
They weren't interested? That seems kind of... Unless I'm missing something. obvious.
So she has that thought while she's walking along the riverbank. She smells the smoke, walks up to the copse of trees, and she hides her horse. And she kind of sneaks up and is listening in on Lan and Moiraine's conversation for a little while until Moiraine suddenly realizes that she's there because she has the spark.
Sure, not just the spark. She's a channeler.
Oh, yeah, that's what I mean. I forgot the spark is an actual term. What do you call that? Just sensing a channeler, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a specific word for it.
No, just that they can sense anyone who's near.
Lan says he can't track the boys, like where they went, because there's so many tracks everywhere that it's all too muddled.
Well, and it's going to be hard to track anyone who gets washed downriver. Like Perrin and Egwene.
Mm-hmm.
Or anyone who gets on a boat. So yeah, there's no footsteps for him to track.
Yeah. And Moiraine says, I thought this was kind of significant. The whole world will be overrun in 5 years if we don't find those boys, Moiraine says simply. The question worries me also, but I have no answers. The ways are closed.
She's wrong about that.
Yeah. The ways are closed, and there has not been an Aes Sedai powerful enough to travel since the time of madness. Also wrong. But she doesn't know that.
Right.
Unless one of the Forsaken is loose, the light sended is not so, yet or ever. There is still no one who can. In any case, I do not think all the Forsaken together could move 1,000 Trollocs. Let us deal with the problems that face us here and now. Everything else must wait. The boys, Lan said. It wasn't a question. I have not been idle while you were away, Moiraine says. One is across the river and alive. As for the others, there was a faint trace downriver, but it faded away as I found it. The bond had been broken for hours before I began my search.
So I assume she's sitting by the fire drinking tea, searching.
Right, in her mind,
yeah.
Essentially.
Right. But yeah, and obviously that bond was broken when the boys gave the coins to Bail Domon.
Last night.
But she can still sense Perrin.
Yeah.
And Egwene is with Perrin, luckily.
The conversation between Lan and Moiraine continues for a second. Suddenly she put her cup down and sat up straight, grimacing. If you watch the wolf too hard, she muttered, a mouse will bite you on the ankle. And she looked right at the tree behind which Nynaeve was hiding. Mistress Elmira, you may come out now if you wish. Nynaeve scrambled to her feet, hastily dusting dead leaves from her dress. Lan had spun to face the tree as soon as Moraine's eyes moved. His sword was in his hand before she finished speaking Nynaeve's name. Now he sheathed it again, with more force than was strictly necessary. His face was almost as expressionless as ever, but Nynaeve thought there was a touch of chagrin about the set of his mouth. She felt a stab of satisfaction. The warder had not known she was there.
Score number 2 for Nynaeve.
Cha-ching! No, it's just cute to watch this back and forth.
Yeah, I really like the way they get to interact there.
Yeah,
like
they keep sort of building respect for each other, and
right.
This keeps happening now that I'm aware of it. We always say this kind of thing, but during my first couple of read-throughs, I didn't really notice or think about like what's happening and like with these small interactions.
Sure,
but they're learning respect for each other, I think, is really what this is. And I mean, I feel like the mutual attraction would have been there anyway.
Sure.
Just physically. But
right.
To actually, they're both people with high standards. They're not just going to throw themselves at anyone pretty. It's true.
Yeah. She's pretty much accepted that she's never going to marry his wisdom.
Yeah.
And he's accepted that he's never going to marry as a warder.
Right.
And obviously he has the whole thing with death and never marrying.
Married to death
thing that really annoys me sometimes. Because I just want him to love Nynaeve and get over it. Which he eventually does. It just takes him a while. Oh, I did want to say one thing. Moiraine is talking and she says, opposition from the White Tower, even from the Armelin seat, I accept. Is it possible that Suan and Moiraine have slightly different opinions of what to do with the Dragon Reborn?
Well, the first thing that popped into my head when I saw that line was that Suan may not have a choice. She can't just go against what all the sitters think. Like, if all the sitters want to do one thing and the Emerlin wants to do another...
True.
I mean, she could. Suan could go through with it, but that's a good way to get yourself killed.
Right. Suan wants to basically pull him and control him a little bit more, and Moiraine thinks he needs to be let loose to fulfill the prophecies.
Yeah.
And that even though they agree the Dragon Reborn must be guided and controlled, maybe they sort of have different ideas on the degree of control.
Probably. Let me see some accusations from Nynaeve. She's like, what kind of plots are you trying to get them into? And Moiraine's answer is tea? She offers. No, I don't want any tea. I would not drink your tea if I was dying of thirst. You won't use any Emmonsfield folks in your dirty Aes Sedai schemes. You have very little room to talk, Wisdom, Moiraine says. You can wield the one power yourself after a fashion, and Nynaeve doesn't believe it.
She denies it, but I think she knows. Yeah. I think she's known for a while. She's very good at deceiving herself.
Yeah. You must listen, Moiraine said firmly. I had my suspicions in Emmonsfield even before I met you. People told me how upset the Wisdom was that she had not predicted the hard winter and the lateness of spring. They told me how good she was at foretelling the weather, at telling the crops. They told me how wonderful her cures were, how sometimes she healed injuries that should have been crippling, so well that there was barely a scar and not a limp or a twinge. The only ill word I heard about you is from a few who thought you were too young for the responsibility, and that only strengthened my suspicions. So much skill, so young. Mistress Barron taught me well. She tried looking at Lan, but his eyes still made her uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Who said I was too young? She demanded. Moiraine smiled, refusing to be diverted. Unlike most women who claim to listen to the wind, you actually can. Sometimes. And this was, I thought, the really important part. Oh, it has nothing to do with the wind, of course. It is of air and water. It is not something you needed to be taught. It was born into you, just as it was born into a queen. But you have learned to handle it, which she still has to. 2 minutes after I came face to face with you, I knew. Do you remember how suddenly I asked you if you were Wisdom? Why, do you think? There was nothing to distinguish you from any other pretty young woman getting ready for the festival. Even looking for a young Wisdom, I expected someone half again your age. Nynaeve remembered that meeting all too well. This woman, more self-possessed than anyone in the women's circle, in a dress more beautiful than any she had ever seen, addressing her as a child. Then Moiraine had suddenly blinked as if surprised, and out of clear sky asked, ... She licked her lips, gone abruptly dry. Skipping ahead. But I can tell you how it began, Moiraine says.
So, let me interrupt.
Yeah.
I love when we get to see Moiraine talk about the past and describe what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Because so much of my theory about what happens in the first couple of chapters comes from that little speech right there.
Yeah, as I was going through this, I was like, ooh, he's quoted this to me a couple of times. And this few paragraphs that are about to come up.
They're so good, and they're so descriptive. And then especially the next one, which is the description of the channeling sickness, which is a template for everything that happens to Rand while he's traveling with Matt.
And I just think this is a great scene.
So just read it because I think it stands alone without any comment needed.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to hear any more of your lies, she said, but the Aes Sedai went right on. Perhaps as much as 8 or 10 years ago, so Nynaeve would have been around 16, 15. The age varies, but always comes young. Right, Egwene's age. There was something you wanted, more than anything else in the world, something you needed, and you got it. A branch suddenly falling where you could pull yourself out of a pond instead of drowning, a friend or a pet getting well when everyone thought they would die. You felt nothing special at the time, but a week or 10 days later, you had your first reaction to touching the true source. Perhaps fever and chills that came on suddenly and put you to bed, then disappeared after only a few hours. None of the reactions, and they vary, last more than a few hours, headaches and numbness and exhilaration all mixed together, and you taking foolish chances or acting giddy. A spell of dizziness when you tripped and stumbled whenever you tried to move, when you could not say a sentence without the tongue mangling half the words. There are others. Do you remember? Nynaeve sat down hard on the ground. Her legs would not hold her up. She remembered, but she shook her head anyway. I will go further, Moiraine said. I'm skipping a little. Moiraine said when Nynaeve kept silent. You use the power to heal either Perrin or Egwene at some time. An affinity develops. You can sense the presence of someone you have healed. And Berlan, you came straight to the Stag of the Lion, that it was not the nearest inn to any gate by which you could have entered. Of the people from Emond's Field, only Perrin and Egwene were at the inn when you arrived. Was it Perrin or Egwene? Or both? Egwene, Nynaeve mumbled. The next thing I underlined is like a paragraph down. She had breakbone fever. And I feel like probably everybody remembers at least this part of the story where Egwene is like really sick. Mm-hmm. And Mistress Barron, who was the woman that trained Nynaeve, sets Nynaeve to sit by the sick girl to basically watch her die. And Nynaeve,
well, she says she's going to be fine.
That's what she says, but Nynaeve in here said she suspected at the time that it was a kindness, that she was just saying that.
Right, but she does say the breakbone. She knows now breakbone fever isn't lethal.
Oh.
It just looks like it is.
Oh. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, I mean, Egwene was going to be totally fine, but she ends up healing way faster than she's supposed to.
She says... I'm skipping ahead a little again. I thought Egwene was dying. I used to look after her sometimes when she was a toddler, when her mother was busy, and I started crying because I was going to have to watch her die. When Mistress Barron came back an hour later, the fever had broken. She was surprised, but she made over me more than Egwene. I always thought she believed I had given the child something and was too frightened to admit it. You were very lucky, Moiraine said. And essentially, Moiraine explains she was lucky. You were lucky you didn't die right then.
Right. Well, and then I'm thinking a week after that event, something
she
happens.
Explains it.
Yeah. So she basically suffers from channeling sickness.
I'm not seeing it, but she does. I don't know if she says it out loud or if she thinks about it. But from Nynaeve's perspective, she says about a week later, she walks into Mistress Barron's house and just collapses on the floor. And Mistress Barron's like, oh my God, what's wrong with you? And puts her in bed. And like an hour or two later, she's totally fine. She said she couldn't like stand up even. She was like, got dizzy and fell on the floor and she couldn't. She knows that it's true. She
does accept the truth when it's presented. She sometimes doesn't like to admit it right away, but she never...
And she has some passing thoughts, like she thinks about all the times that someone walked up behind her in the village and she knew exactly who it was. And she thinks about who they were, and at some point, her cures did surprisingly well. And now she literally knows who's like behind the other wall sometimes, or whatever.
And there was a period of time where I didn't think that happened again, but I've actually read some articles that there are times when I think like the woman who bonds Rand.
Yeah.
And she heals him at one point, and there's a few times where she's able to find him before she bonds him and after she heals him. And there's one or two other examples I think that people were able to come up with. So it doesn't happen often, but it does come back up a couple of times in the series. I like this quote when Nynaeve asks Moiraine why she's trying to help the boys. And she basically says, "The Dark One wants them," Moiraine replied. "If the Dark One wants a thing, I oppose it. Can there be a simpler reason or better?" And there's more. It's a bit of an Aes Sedai answer in terms of like, just because the Dark One opposes something, I oppose it. Like, she's not telling her the real reason, which is one of those boys is probably the Dragon Reborn. But I really like that quote. If the Dark One wants something, I oppose him. Do I need a better reason?
Yeah.
He's that evil.
Yeah. The next thing I have for this is it looks like Moiraine uses a bit of reverse psychology on Nynaeve because she's being like a jerk to Moiraine throughout this conversation. Oh, that's right after what you just read. Lan, we must be going. South, I think. I fear the wisdom will not be accompanying us. Nynaeve's mouth tightened at the way the Aes Sedai said wisdom. It seemed to suggest that she was turning her back on great things in favor of something petty.
So I was saying they were doing a bit of bad cop, good cop there. Because like Lan almost calls her Nynaeve And then like doesn't say Sedai, you know, so he's like sort of giving her a bunch of respect of like
and then of course like predictably Nynaeve is like, I'll show you, I'm coming.
Oh no,
yeah. I'm coming.
Yeah, I'll be there.
Are you
Don't
ready?
you think about trying to
leaving.
stop me?
Yeah, she's like I mean, I wrote down Nynaeve is super easy to manipulate. She's a really predictable character.
In the beginning.
At this point, Moiraine has a really easy time controlling what Nynaeve is doing.
Really what all the characters are doing.
Yeah.
She's very good at making sure that she's able to play off their emotions. She's able to control them pretty well without telling them really anything.
Right. Oh, and then I also wrote that she just was telling Nynaeve, like, when the White Tower finds a powerful channeler like Egwene, we don't let them not go to the tower to train. It's not an option.
Well, is that just because she has the spark and she would die without it? Yeah.
But then she says, Nynaeve, you have great potential.
Sure.
Like she senses how, or she has some idea of how strong Nynaeve is. And then she does this little bit of manipulation to get Nynaeve to do what? Continue toward Tarvalin.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's why. Not only because of the link with Egwene makes her valuable. So she'll be able to find Egwene, and Moraine's not letting Egwene go. She's not. She'll track her down, too.
Oh, yeah. And she knows she's probably with one of the boys, so that's a good start when she's right about that.
She knows that Nynaeve is a key piece, and she can't allow Nynaeve to leave the group now. So she's just cleverly manipulating her right into doing what she wants.
Yep.
Which is continue to head towards the White Tower and help her round up the Emmons Field kids.
Which, I mean, she's playing off Nynaeve's desire to help the kids and saying, well, the best way you can help them right now is to, help me save them from whatever they're doing, help me track them down.
Yeah. And so Moiraine has a tab on all three boys. Mm-hmm. I mean, she knows she just lost two, but she knows where they're heading, and she knows they're probably on the river.
Right.
And she knows exactly where Perrin is. She doesn't know where Egwene is, and she says that out loud, but she knows that Nynaeve does, or can find her.
When she gets close enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
The only person she doesn't know where they are is Tom, and at this point, it's just a Gleeman.
Yeah. He's not necessarily important.
She could care less.
I wonder if Min had anything to say about Tom. That would be pure speculation. Do we ever get a reading on Tom?
Yeah, well, he's got the man juggling fire, not him.
Oh, we did get something. Yeah, I forgot about that.
So, but that's more history, I think. So she talks about the bond that she has with the boys here. She actually tells Nynaeve about it. Now, and this sort of threw a hole in my whole compulsion theory. Because right here she says, it only allows me to discover if they still live and find them should we become separated. That's a pretty clear statement that the bond doesn't do anything other than let her locate them. And I have a hard time getting around that.
Yeah, but that's just what she describes as the bond. I assume the coin, when we were talking about that theory, I assumed the coin was a tracking device, and compulsion is compulsion. You don't do it with a coin.
Oh, so you think she cast that separately?
Yeah. That's what I figured.
Okay. Yeah, I can buy into that.
Yeah.
Way to help me keep my theories going. I appreciate that.
I mean, there's no evidence to prove otherwise.
Oh, no,
but there's not a ton of evidence to prove. I mean, a little bit.
But I read this theory. I read this sentence, and I was just like, "Oh, that really."
I saw that too, but it doesn't necessarily mean.
Fair enough.
That we're
fair
wrong.
Enough. I'll grab on to that.
Sticking to our guns, guys. Yeah. I mean, we only had one person call us out, but they didn't even manage to really. I think it was a Redditor. They didn't even really manage to shut us down in any way. They were just like, "No, that's not what it is," and that's all they had to say.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard when we know we're going off on these theories and people are just like, no, that's not the case. And it's like, yeah, we know that's not necessarily the case.
We know it's not explicitly stated.
Right. But we're speculating.
Yeah.
So, I'd love to see, I always love it when there's evidence. That's,
right.
When they're citing X, Y, and Z, this quote, that makes me happy. But when people are just like, no, you're wrong, it's hard to
Oh, yeah. I feel like any evidence that we're going to see for the Moiraine's compulsion is going to die off now. We're probably not going to see very much more.
No. I don't think there's enough there, one way or the other.
Yeah.
But, like I said, fun to speculate.
Fun to speculate. Do you have anything else? I have one more thing, but it's just a cute add-on.
You know, just sort of a chapter about them splitting up. So we've got Rand, Tom, and Matt are on the river on a boat. Egwene and Perrin are across the river. And Nynaeve, Lan, and Moiraine are not. They are still on the Shadar Logoth side of the river.
And, as Nynaeve decides she's going to leave with Lan and Moiraine, the warder packs up his and Moraine's horses, and then as Nynaeve and Moiraine are still talking, or just finishing up their conversation, Lan says, "I'll fetch your horse," he told Nynaeve as he finished with the last saddle tie. He started up the riverbank, and she allowed herself a small smile. After the way she had watched him undiscovered, he was going to try and find her horse unaided. He would learn that she left little in the way of tracks when she was stalking. It would be a pleasure when he came back empty-handed. And of course, at the end of the chapter, he shows up with the horse. So, like, she gets to sneak up with him, and she, like, gains a little respect, and then she's like, he'll never find my horse. And then he turns up with the horse, and she's like, oh, well.
Oh, yeah. No, there's great mutual respect there. It's really, it's why I love the relationship so much, because it is built on mutual respect.
Yeah.
And I see that, again, with even, like, Moiraine and Tom. Like, Moiraine respects what Tom is able to do with the Game of Houses. Like, she's from Cairhien. She's a Cairhienan, so she clearly is very much, and Aes Sedai is stewed in the Game of Houses.
Yeah.
And he's really good at it.
The best, maybe.
Yeah. There's so many relationships where maybe we don't get to see them do a lot of, like, lovey-dovey,
making out and rolling around.
And like there's not a lot of like clever dialogue, but there's a lot of mutual respect for the things that the people are actually doing.
Yeah. I really like that scene.
Yeah, and so rather than showing, I think, romantic dialogue, the series shows romantic relationships. Watch what they do, not what they say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many times I've said that during this series, but I'm going to say it a lot.
A lot of times what they do is the opposite of what they say.
Yeah.
The depth of it and the reality in that. Like,
right.
How, that's what real life is like.
Oh, yeah. I lie all the time about what I'm doing.
Well, and a lot of time people are like, they'll talk a big game, but once you actually look at how they act, you're like, I get you now. Now I get you.
What'd you have for breakfast? Plain yogurt. What did I actually have? Reese's Peanut Butter Cups.
They've both got dairy.
Oh, one's pure sugar.
I gotta do like laundry. Oh, dude, I have a food disposal in my sink in my apartment. It broke. I broke it the other day.
Oh,
it's my fault. It's
Is
totally my fault.
Did you check and see if there's a little button under there to press?
I didn't. I haven't tried like taking the shit out of my cabinets yet, because I'm gonna do that before I call a plumber, because I'm not calling my landlord.
All right. Tell me this. What happened? How did it break?
Okay, so check this out. I dropped something in there, turned it on, heard it, shut it off, stuck my hand in there, fished out the little metal pieces, and it was like a little spout for a pouring thing, and it just slipped my mind that it could be down there. But then I turned it back on, and it worked. I was like, great, awesome. And the next time I tried to turn it back on, it just went, like the motor was engaging, but it wasn't doing anything.
It may be fine.
Now, when I turn it on, it does nothing. It doesn't make a sound.
Make sure there's nothing in there. I assume you've done that. That there's nothing.
I've stuck my hand in there. And
have you tried like
for a long period of time? You spin the thing.
It spins freely.
Try to find stuff. Yeah.
Get on your back, crawl underneath, look up. There's a button. There's a fuse in the garbage disposal.
Okay.
And you can hit the button and it'll reset the fuse.
Now that you said that, you know what I'm thinking? Because the first thing I did, after I did all that, I got underneath, looked at it, and it's plugged into the wall underneath the sink. So I unplugged it and plugged it back in, and now it does nothing. But I think you might be right. I'm sure this is really interesting, John, talking about my fucking kitchen sink.
And my toes.
It's mind blowing. I'm sure. But I'm not calling my landlord. I'm not telling them that I broke something.
No, I don't think you broke anything. I think you just need to hit a button and it'll start working again.
Worst comes to worst, I'm already like I will hire that plumber myself.
Yeah.
And have them fix the thing so that I don't have to call them.
Those things are designed that when they get jammed up, instead of breaking, they pop a few. I don't know if it's a fuse or if there's some emergency switch that they're not supposed to break like that when they get jammed up. And there's usually, once you clear it out, you can hit that button and they just start working again.
Oh, that would be a lifesaver.
Now, I don't know, model, warranty.
That's something I was going to tackle tomorrow to try to figure out whether I need to buy a new one or not. I was spoiled by it for a while. I just dump all kinds of shit down everything, all the food scraps. I didn't never scrape anything. It just wasn't. I love it.
I haven't had one for a while.
Did we have one? Didn't we have one in one of our houses? Yes. No.
I don't think I've had one in Portland, honestly.
Oh, maybe not.
Maybe. Anyway, I definitely haven't had one in my last two places. I don't remember about the rest. No, you don't have them in Canada?
Really?
I think in the U.S., if you have a dishwasher, you almost are required to have a garbage disposal. I think that's building code. So they're pretty common here.
Well, it's usually just a button next to the sink that there's a
switch.
Spinning blades inside of the inside of the drain, so you can just pack shit down there, and it just
If you've seen
grinds it up and sends it down the drain.
Heroes. Save the cheerleader, save the world. Remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a scene. She has healing factor, and she sticks her hand down in one of those. Yeah, TV. All right.
I think a couple of people might have died in the Final Destination movies with.
They're horrible.
Yeah, I remember sitting down the first couple of times, and it was just a weird experience.
It is. It's very weird.
When I don't even really know what I'm gonna say. Before, you remember, I was like, how much do we plan out? How much do we choreograph what we say?
You wanted to write out every single word.
Yeah, but we do well, not literally none, but I underline some quotes and things, and sometimes I write down something in my notes that I want to say, but it's a sentence out of or a few sentences out of the hour that we talk for.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time, or not a lot of time, but I take a few notes, and I mean, we both know the series really well, and a lot of what we do is play off each other. So
yeah,
it's hard to prep for that. I definitely did a lot. I spent the last year or so listening to the audiobook and listening very specifically to the pronunciation of the names, trying to learn them as best I could to prep for the podcast. I definitely had that in mind because
I listened to it once. Maybe I should do that again. I probably should.
You should, yeah. And not saying they do it right all the time or consistently all the time. Mogedian versus Mogedian is the particular example that really stands out. But they do pretty good job, pretty consistent job with the pronunciations.
The audiobooks are fun.
They're great. I honestly, I've listened to a lot of audiobooks, and I think the married couple that does both Jordan and Sanderson books are really good at what they do.
Oh, that's adorable. They're married?
They're married, yeah.
Most people aren't willing to so I'll be reading in a bar or something, waiting for my friends to show up or something like that, and some people will just look at the book I'm reading and be like, what the hell are you doing with your time? that's how many pages in that? I'm like, I don't know, like 850. And they're like, Jesus Christ. And I'm like, yeah, well, there's 14 more.
Yeah, some people won't even read it without.
Yeah.
But I do think, as much as I am not a fan of George R.R. Martin, his books have done an amazing amount for the Wheel of Time.
I think you're probably right.
And it goes back to, of course, Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and then Game of Thrones, right? We had to have that progression. And only now could Wheel of Time possibly come to the screen.
Yeah. I don't think anyone really would have considered it before.
No. And I don't think it would have been good before.
Yeah.
Maybe if it had been the Game of Thrones, but it's not sexy enough.
No. You could sex it up.
You could, but I don't want to.
There's a lot of really brutal scenes. Like some of these action scenes, it's not as sexy as Game of Thrones.
No.
There's no incest. There's no.
No, and I don't think we started this series because we knew the TV show was coming.
No.
I think we've been talking about this. I think it was just a coincidence that was announced shortly before we started recording.
Yeah, and we were planning. It was like right as we were. We may have even done our first recording or two before we found out, like, oh, it's like actually seems to be happening. Because people have been talking about that for years.
You can show some of that in more detail.
So the Aes Sedai locker room or something.
Totally, yeah. The rampant lesbian. Well, you've got pillow friends, and, you could show, like, if you wanted to go with Lan and Nynaeve kissing in the moonlight while they're traveling, you could do that way earlier in the Eye of the World. You could really, like, push some of the relationships to be more upfront, more sexy.
And and the blood and brutality, I think, also, and the shadow spawn are you could make really horrifying. I think to add
Sure. Like,
I'm just keep using the term sex appeal, but I'm using the
violence,
blood, gore, yeah.
But it's not in the books specifically, unlike in Martin's,
right,
where it is very explicit.
Like we see Lan cut off a Fade's head a couple chapters ago, but Jordan doesn't go to any length to be like, and then its entrails fell out.
Right.
But that probably, like, you could put that in there and it wouldn't be far from the story.
No, you could see like fountaining black blood and Lan coming back with just like black blood dripping down his face and being like, and totally covered in gore as the Fade like flails around and like sprays it everywhere.
There's a ton of stuff you could do with that.
Yeah.
And Fade's blood injures human beings.
Oh yeah, and then the Mashadar getting a hold of the Trolloc, like that torturous.
That scene we just talked about, where the Fade is screaming in pain. Like that could be a really brutal.
Totally.
Yeah, you could do something with that.
So once you get out of the Two Rivers, the violence amps up pretty fast.
I'm excited to see what happens.
I am too. I'm also prepared to be very disappointed.
Yeah, I hope it's not terrible.
Me too.
But it may stray from the books.
I almost hope it does. Well, okay, I did the math. There's about 50 chapters per book, and we're doing about 2 chapters a week. That means we can do about a book every 6 months. And at 14 books, that's about 7 years. That's the rate we're going. We have about 7 years of content for this podcast. I've definitely seen podcasts that run for 7 years, and we've been friends for 4, so, I think we're both pretty stable. Like,
sure.
This could go for that long. It's not unreasonable.
I'm down.
Yeah, but you know what? We're 10 weeks in, so.
And I've been off mic talking about starting a second podcast, but I'm nowhere near even beginning that.
Oh, yeah.
Totally unrelated.
Yeah.
But.
And I'd love to edit it, so.
Yeah, or just might start working on a second podcast together.
No.
And that, I figure, would probably be totally script. Like, I would have to write a script.
Yes.
Anyway.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or your favorite podcast client.
She has that thought while she's walking along the riverbank.